Nagkaroon ka na?
Yep.
Hi, what's up guys, and welcome to another episode of Batman Reacts to the World. Today we're gonna be discussing some serious stuff. As of course, as usual, we discuss serious stuff. But I would like to apologize because it's been 2 weeks since our last update of this channel. Because, DepEd, life in general, law school and stuff, mahirap pagsabay-sabayin sa pag-maintain ng pinaka-importanting channel sa balat ng universe. Today, we're gonna be talking about a topic which should be the bedrock or explanation para sa mga susunod natin na mga videos. Kasi, we'll be discussing moral issues, we'll be discussing ethical issues, and I would like na merong solid foundation yung mga pinag-discuss natin. Because I am a theist, Christian at that, we'll be referencing many things that are unique to the Christian theist worldview. So gusto ko, hindi na ako pabalik-balik kasi ang balak namin i-discuss is transgender issues, homosexuality, divorce, and other ethical and moral issues that are pressing in our generation. And ano yung magiging basis natin for discussion there. Napansin ko kasi na babalik ako on the very basic, the question, is there really a God? It's important to answer that question not because I'm Christian, but because the question of God has been one that has been haunting the human race ever since the beginning of the human race or human civilization. And saka, ito rin yung magiging foundation on whether or not may sense na we try to make sense out of the things of this world. And mahihirapan din tayo na mag-discuss ng patungkol sa mga susunod na issue na hindi natin nasisettle yung issue on whether or not there is a God. What are the objectives of this video? The objective of this video is not to convince you that there is a God. Although I believe that, para sa akin, hindi yun ang imperative na gusto kong gawin. Hindi yun yung gusto kong gawin na convincing kayo that you should believe that there is a God. What I'm trying to do today is to discuss some two arguments in particular which I think are the strongest arguments for believing the existence of a God. Not belief in a God, believing a God, but proving the existence that there is a God or there is a possibility for a God. Today we're going to be discussing two major arguments for theism. The first one is an argument from the Kalam Cosmological Argument, which is scientific and philosophical in nature. And the other one is for the moral argument for the existence of God. Okay, why is this important? Why? Because what do we get when we talk about religion? Let's just say religion per se, or faith or worldview. More often than not, ang sinasabi natin is yung template na pag tinanong ka, uy, anong religion nyo? Blah blah blah, ganito, ganyan, Catholic, Iglesia, Baptist, born again, ganyan. And then, hanggang dun lang kadalasan yung extent ng conversation. No hard questions asked like, so anong pinaniniwalaan nyo? What do you believe for this particular issue? What's your stand against this particular issue coming from your side of the equation? Yung usually sabihin is, God bless. God bless po. Tapos, hanggang dun lang. Pag tinanong mo, why do you believe this? Importante na maging magkaibigan tayo kahit magkakaiba ang ating paniniwala without even discussing kung ano yung mga paniniwala na yun na magkakaiba. Ayun laging kadalasan sinasabi, God bless! It doesn't work that way. Because there are differences sa ating mga pinaniniwalaan. There are actual, real differences in our beliefs. Theism is different from atheism or atheism. And that is a very important discussion because most of the arguments I'll be formulating for the next videos will come from the theistic worldview or from the theistic perspective. In particular, the Christian worldview from a theistic perspective. Okay, so the first argument that we'd like to discuss is yung tinatawag natin na cosmological argument. What is a cosmological argument? Cosmos meaning the universe, or pag sinabi kasi nating cosmological argument, it is arguing for the existence of God from the argument of causes. That simple, ganito kasi yun. Thomas Aquinas, that philosopher and theologian that we call Saint Thomas Aquinas, he formulated 5 ways on how to prove the existence of God. One of those ways is the cosmological argument, in which he argues that there is an unmoved mover, or the first cause na kanyang tinatawag. Well, meaning, nakita niyo itong cup na to, nandito to kasi may dahilan kung bakit may cup na dahil may gumawa. Nakita niyo yung gumawa ng cup na yon, nag-i-exist yung machineries na yon dahil may gumawa sa machineries na yon. Nakita niyo yung mga tao na gumawa ng machineries na yon, may gumawa doon sa gumawa ng machine na panggawa ng cup. Nakita nyo yung tao na yon na gumawa ng machineries na panggawa ng cup. May gumawa din doon. Kung paano yung ginawa, X-rated na yon. That's not our concern. The point is, infinite regressions, so on and so forth, going backwards to eternity past, is mayroon somewhere na magsastop yung infinite regression ng mga causes. Now, yung chain of causes, that this is event Z, there should have been a point A na hindi pwedeng infinitely nagre-regress tayo finding the cause of this thing is this thing which is caused by this thing. Hindi pwedeng magpapasok tayo all throughout. Bakit? Sabi niya, because that will be absurd. Because if that is the case, then the universe would not exist, kasi it necessitates that somewhere along the line mangangailangan talaga ng isang uncaused cause. Yun yung bedrock ng cosmological argument. However, developments in 11th and 12th century Islam, meron tayong theologian na ang pangalan ay si Al-Ghazali. He formulated an argument that mimics or parallels yung argument ni Aquinas, but in a more sophisticated way. And this is more vividly explained to us na gagamitin natin ngayon doon sa Kalam Cosmological Argument, which was popularized by the philosopher William Lane Craig. Okay, what are the main propositions? First is that statement number 1 is that whatever begins to exist has a cause. And number 2 premise is that the universe began to exist. And the conclusion is that, therefore, the universe has a cause. Tagalog natin. Ang ibig sabihin, premise number 1, examine natin pa isa-isa. Na lahat ng bagay na nag-umpisang mag-exist ay may dahilan kung bakit siya nag-exist. But before we go there, we have to appreciate that whenever it begins to exist, the universe began to exist, the universe therefore has a cause, which caused it to exist, is an airtight argument, or it is what we call in logic, sa syllogisms, we call this a valid argument. Why? Because if the 2 premises are correct, the conclusion is properly derived. Meaning, hindi ka nagtitake ng leap of logic na A, B, therefore C. Kumbaga, the validity of C will depend in either of the 2 premises. Meaning, pag napatunayan mong mali ang A, pag napatunayan mong mali ang B, or pag napatunayan mong mali ang A at B, hindi pwedeng maging tama ang conclusion that therefore the universe has a cause. Again, the premises are whatever begins to exist has a cause. The universe began to exist, and therefore, if A and B are true, then the universe has a cause, or meaning may dahilan or may cause na nag-brought ng effect, which is what we call the universe. Okay, so to examine this, kailangan natin tingnan yung mga premises on how valid are they. The first premise seems to be obvious sa atin. It is common sa ating experience as human beings or sentient or rational agent, that nothing will come into existence without a cause. Kasi if the opposite is true, then mahihirapan tayong explain why things don't come up out of nothing. mahihirapan tayong explain na yung if things can exist without a cause, bakit pag sinabi kong magkaroon dito ng 10 million pesos, bakit hindi siya automatically mag-appear? Bakit hindi tayo nakakita ng isang anime character in real life springing out randomly na may nakita tayong ganon? Bakit wala tayong nakikita na heavenly bodies na nakita natin katabi ng Mars? May katabi ng Mars. Ang tawag natin sa kanya ay pare. Bakit hindi yun nangyayari? Because things cannot come out of existence out of nothing. Now, people may say na labas sa Newtonian mechanics, we go into quantum mechanics, and things can exist out of nothing, which is still not true because that's not how quantum mechanics work. Quantum mechanics is not an explanation of how things come into being from nothing, or quantum mechanics does not explain how something happens without something causing it. It's much complex for this video, but that's not the point of quantum mechanics. Again, to just nail in the point, hindi tayo nakakakita or we cannot possibly imagine a thing existing out of nothing without something that caused it. It's just beyond the limits of human imagination or human thought and rationality. Hindi nangyayari. Bakit? Because that's not how reality works. Bakit? Kasi kung gano'n ang mga bagay-bagay, we can never prove anything anymore. If some things can exist out of nothing, it's very hard for us to grasp yung ating reality, because how can we assume that if something comes out of nothing at random without a cause, how can we say that something actually becomes nothing? What assurance is there sa atin na pumunta tayo sa trabaho, nag-aaral tayo, na pagbalik natin nandyan pa rin yung bahay na uuwian natin, or yung mga tao na kahalubilo natin ay nandyan pa rin. For us to comprehend reality, our brains demand a degree of certainty na imposibleng magkaroon if we allow the denier of the premise that whatever begins to exist has a cause. This is laborious to prove because it's simply unimaginable to human mind na mag-i-exist ang something out of nothing without something to cause it in the first place. Okay. And then, punta tayo doon sa number 2 premise. The second premise is that the universe began to exist. Now, is this true? Our current science, the current models of our science point that the universe did begin to exist. And we call this a theory. Nung una, this was a person who does not believe in the theory. We call this the Big Bang theory. Naging Big Bang siya because somebody ridiculed it, that the universe was at some moment in time densely packed into a singularity from whence nag-expand ang ating universe. We'll have to remember that the universe is not expanding in a vacuum, but rather that the universe is expanding from itself and then nag-extend din over the passage of time, nag-expand ang universe from that point of singularity. We have to remember that before the universe, there was no space and time in the dimensions that we know about. Walang and gravity included. Walang time, walang space, and walang gravity as we know it. We can't comprehend this, but imagine that, kasi ni-imagine natin when we talk about the Big Bang is that there is a blank universe and then mayroon doon maliit na super condensed particle kung napumutok, kaya nag-i-expand siya doon sa space na yon, which is not true at all. The concept of the Big Bang is that there was nothing, there was no space, there was no time, there was no gravity to hold things together, but there was literally nothing, wala. And then after the Big Bang, doon na nagkaroon ng tinatawag natin na space, time, and gravity, the very elements that make up our universe together with matter. Okay, so the current evidences suggest na there was a Big Bang that happened, and even as a theist, I can believe that because I can reconcile that with Genesis chapter 1, that in the beginning God said, let there be light, and bang, there was light. To me, I reconcile Genesis 1 with the Big Bang theory, and wala sa aking logical contradiction or scientific contradiction para sa akin holding both views together. So, when Christians are doubtful about the Big Bang theory, I'm like, why? It's either ignorance of biblical literature or ignorance of the current scientific literature, or a combination of both in varying degrees. Now, I'm not saying that I'm a scientist or a qualified person to talk about all the intricacies of the Big Bang. But suffice it to say that I think, as a normal person like the viewers of this channel, that I can comprehend this in a sense na kaya nating ma-explain that yes, the universe could have begun to exist at the point of the Big Bang. Now, there will be videos in the internet that prove that there was a Big Bang. Kasi how did we come up with a Big Bang in the first place? There were two scientific developments, among others, which stands out. First is the special theory of relativity ni Albert Einstein, explaining the nature of space, gravity itself, and time, and its relationship with each other. And then what we have, the discovery of the redshift phenomenon ni Edwin Hubble, kung saan noong 1928, if I'm not mistaken, kung saan ipinangalan yung telescope natin sa space station na the Hubble telescope. So all this led to the understanding that the universe is actually expanding. And by logical conclusion, if the universe is expanding, therefore the universe is expanding from somewhere or somewhen. Because the concept of expanding is galing dito, nag-expand ng paganon. So by concluding and reversing the process, the universe goes like this, the space is expanding. Pag binalik natin, there could have been a time in the finite or definite past na yung lahat ng objects sa universe, including time, space, and gravity, was condensedly packed in a singularity. That it actually began to that the universe actually began to exist at that time. This was in stark contrast doon sa theory ni Aristotle, and held up at that time by the scientific community, that the universe was in a static eternity, meaning all that we see right now is what has always been, what is, and what will always be. And the discoveries of the theory of relativity, in the formulation of the theory of relativity and the discovery of the redshift phenomenon ni Edwin Hubble, led to the disavowal of the eternal universe state ni Aristotle and the scientific community at that time. Why? Because we have what we call the law of thermodynamics. It's also another proof against the existence of a steady state universe na hindi siya gumagalaw. It is what it is. Because the concept of entropy is that the universe is becoming more and more chaotic as time passes by, which is true kasi nagtatransform yung mga forms ng energy. Okay. Shout out sa mga sponsor. Anyway, going back. So now, we know that the universe began to exist. So we can now make the conclusion that therefore the universe has a cause. That the universe itself has a cause. Bakit? Kasi sinunod natin At nakita natin na tama or logical paniwalaan yung first two premises. That whatever begins to exist has a cause, that the universe did begin to exist, so therefore, the universe was caused. That it did not come from nothing into something without something that caused it to be. Okay. Now ngayon, yung usual na tanong, sinong gumawa doon sa cause? Sino yung gumawa doon sa cause na nag-cause sa universe para mag-exist siya? Now, we can jump into a conclusion that there was something and that something should be a very powerful being that can create a universe to exist. And that something that has caused the universe must have, and ito yung importante, must have the freedom of the will to cause this thing or the universe and everything in it to exist. Na hindi pwedeng nag-exist lang siya just because walang will yung gumawa. Ano yun? Nag-exist lang siya, wala lang. No, but it dictates that whatever caused the universe to exist has that power and freely chose to exercise that power to create the universe. Why? What's the problem na naisipin natin na kahit walang will, yung creator, pwede siyang makapag-create, pwede siyang nakapag-create ng universe. To me, it doesn't make sense because absence the concept of choice, hindi naman makaka-create ng universe because it requires rationality or it requires some degree of autonomy doon sa cause. Okay, now there is also another argument for the existence of God and we call it the moral argument. The moral argument is stated something like this. If God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. And objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. Again, look at the construction of the argument and you will see that the conclusion derives properly and bases its veracity from the veracity of the first two premises. Again, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values do exist, therefore God exists. Okay, when we speak of moral values, we are talking about whether something is good or bad. Meaning, maganda ba or mabuti ang isang bagay. When we talk about moral duties, we are concerned whether something is right or wrong. Or sasabihin natin na ang bagay ay tama or mali. Again, when we talk about moral values, we are talking about good versus evil. When we talk of moral duties, we are talking about the oughtness, O-U-G-H-T, on whether or not something is right or wrong, tama or mali. To say naman that, going back to the first premise, to say that something is objective means that it is independent of what people think or perceive. By contrast, ang ibig sabihin naman ng subjective is to say that kabaliktaran siya ng objective, meaning it is dependent on what human persons or rational agents think or perceive. Pag sinabi natin subjective, it is subject to the opinion of rational beings, namely human beings. Pag sinabi natin objective is that it exists or it transcends rational beings na hindi siya dependent sa kung ano ang dinilikta ng panahon. Okay, and why do we know that and why do we claim that objective moral values cannot exist out of a transcendent God? Because walang magiging basis ang morality apart from an objective point of view, meaning an objective perspective. Kasi lahat tayo may kanya-kanyang opinion. It doesn't mean that we are all correct. Are we all entitled to our opinion? Yes. But are our opinions equally valid? No, of course not. Bakit? Some arguments, some statements are more valid than others. While the right to speak, we all have an equal right to speak, our arguments do not have the same validity. Okay? And why do we know that objective moral values is something that cannot exist out of a God? Because it just is. Bakit? Pag sinabi kasi natin na na pwedeng mangyari yun, ano yung naging basis? What becomes now the basis if moral values, objective moral values, can exist outside of God? Ano? Rhetorical yun. It's an argument out of necessity that if something is objective morally, meaning it is transcendent doon at hindi siya dependent sa mga tao na nagpe-perceive nito. Otherwise, magiging subjective na yon. Now, the more important question sa our moral argument is that whether or not may mga objective moral values. And here, we can still say that yes, there are actually objective moral values and duties. Halimbawa, in any culture, mali ang pumatay ka ng tao na hindi justified. In any culture, mali ang rape. There are perverse cultures that, view rape as something normal. Like, there are some tribes in Africa that think na mawawala yung HIV nila pag nang-rape sila ng mga bata. Talk about equality. It's true. But wherever we go, we know that some things are universally true. Halimbawa, pagpatay sa magulang is in any culture acceptable na walang dahilan? How about sacrificing infants? Tama ba yon? Hindi porke ginawa ng mga Inca, ng mga Aztec, tama yon. They know what they were doing was wrong. Bakit? Kasi may mga tao silang pinatay for going against those traditions. And even so, it doesn't mean na may mga gumawa na culture, therefore hindi na universally accepted yung moral value na yon. No, it just simply shows that how perverse human beings are, that despite knowing something as morally, objectively, dapat nilang hindi gawin, ginagawa pa rin nila. It doesn't negate moral objectivity, but it simply proves the universality of human depravity. Okay. Pag nagnakaw is universally unacceptable. In any culture, ang pagnanakaw is wrong. Walang culture na tama ang magnakaw because property is sacred. Yung pangangatawan mo, yung mga pagmamayari mo, those things are sacred. Again, rape is universally a taboo, universally wrong. Kahit saan kultura ka pumunta, kahit magkaroon ng isang universe, magkaroon pa ng isang planet Earth sa Andromeda Galaxy, still, in that planet, kung magkaroon doon ng rational human beings, rape will still be wrong. Murder will still be wrong. Theft will still be wrong. Corruption will still be wrong. Kasi theft pa rin yun. Those things are still wrong. And it just proves that objective moral values and duties do exist. And hindi pinag-uusapan dito yung ethics. That's something else. That's a discussion of what is acceptable and unacceptable. But we are talking about oughtness, objective morality that we know cannot exist out of an objective point of reference, which we are trying to prove is God. Okay. So that sums up two of the arguments that I personally is my favorite when talking to people, convincing that there is a God. Kasi, again, going back, closing. It's important that we discuss these things because these things actually decide on what our worldview will be. And we have to remember that our worldviews matter because worldviews are not confined within the spaces of our rationality. Our worldviews will affect how we behave, and how we behave will definitely affect how we interact with each other in this world. So kumbaga, hindi pwedeng pag nagtanungan tayo ng ating pananampalataya or ating paniniwala, ang sasabihin natin sa iba ay, God bless, it's okay na magkaiba tayo ng paniniwalaan as long as we respect each other. That's baloney. That's evading important discussions that we should be having. And I think that will be all for this episode of Batman Reacts to the World. Watch out for our for our next videos. And shout out to these sponsors. Baka naman gusto nyo mag-sponsor. Bye-bye!